Good evening. Welcome to our third webinar in our series on the 18th edition draft for public comment. My name is Steve Wharton and I'm the Scheme Manager here at NAPIT. With me tonight is Bertie, NAPIT Trade Association Chairman and Technical Director, and Richard Townsend, Technical Development Engineer here at NAPIT. They'll take you through the presentation. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to use the Ask a Question function, which is in your control panel, and for most of you, this will be to the right of your screen. We'll then do our very best at the end to get through as many of these as we can. You'll also find a copy of the presentation and a certificate of attendance in the handout section in the control panel, which you can download for your records. We'll leave a couple of minutes at the end of the session to give you time to open and save this if you wish. There'll be a short survey at the end of the webinar, and we'd really welcome your feedback to make sure that these webinars are as useful as possible going forward. So I'll pass you through to Frank and Richard to get things started.
Well, welcome everybody. We're going to cover the 18th edition presentation on Part 6 and the appendices. With myself, Bertie, the Group Technical Director and Trade Association Chairman, and Richard Townsend, the Technical Development Officer. So we're going through the DPC. So what is a DPC? It's a means to allow our electrical industry and other interested stakeholders to review the new proposed 18th edition and submit comments to the content of the 18th edition. This will allow JPL 64, the committee responsible for 7671, to look through the comments they receive for inclusion or to revise the wording within the new standard.
So, where can we find the DPC? Well, historically, the IET and BSI have shared the responsibility, and you could have sent it into either by downloadable PDF or a fillable Word form. The two companies would then get together, compile a massive document, that would go to JPL 64, it get mulled through, go various panels, and go from there. This time round, it's all electronic. It can only be found on BSI's website, the website as you can see on the screen in front of you, and you do have to register, and Frank's just going to talk a little bit more about that.
So within the BSI Drafts website, this requires you to register, and you enter a few details, your email and a password, and you can see full details of how to log on to the website on our webinar on the 6th of June, and it gives you all details of how to register and how to comment.
This is an extremely important stage. There are two ways to make comments, and they are both absolutely important. The first one, make a comment, give a proposed change. You must give a proposed change, submit your comment live, and that's it, that's done. The second way, make a comment, give your proposed change, very important to do that. And you can do as many comments as you like, make as many comments as you like, and you can store them up and review them later to either remove one, change one. But it's important that after you've done that, you go back and you do submit those changes. It's no point in making lots of comments, making lots of proposed changes, reviewing them and then not submitting them, because as soon as the final date approaches, all of those comments will be removed and they won't be looked at. So only comments that are being submitted will be looked at.
And your comments are valuable. The committee looks forward to receiving comments anyone has about the 18th edition. We need to make sure it's suitable for the industry. So it's vital, therefore, if you save your comments and proposals to submit at a later date, you've got to remember to submit them before the deadline. And the deadline is the 23rd of August this year. You failure to submit them, as Richard says, they will not come through to the committee, and they won't be looked at, and they could be important comments you have made, and you would have lost them.
Okay, so I move on. Part 6, inspection and testing. Part 6 has had some very important changes. The most important and the most obvious being the numbering system. The IEC and Senelec documents, which control our various wiring regulations parts, BS 7671 parts, have changed. So chapters 64 and 65 now replace chapters 61, 62 and 63. That doesn't mean chapter 63 has disappeared, more that its content has been absorbed into chapter 64 and 65, and then obviously 65 and 64 will have new clauses and new information that you're not used to. But that's the biggest key change, the number change for that part.
So within Part 6, we've got many new regulations, and though they look like new regulations, in reality they've moved from the other parts of 61, 62, 63. As can be seen in this new regulation 641.4, it has parts that come from the original 610.4 and includes a part of the old 610.1. It's been necessary to change the numbering system to fall in line with the European CENELEC and international IEC document changes to the numbering system. And as you can see from the screen where it's been deleted in red, the new regulations have changed in green and been swapped from different regulation numbers.
In keeping with the IEC and CENELEC changes, more emphasis has been put on requirements for inspection. So SBDs, both load changing at grid level, environmental lightning protection, measures against electromagnetic disturbances, have all got very much more emphasis on them. So it's a lot more important you take notice of those because they are going to become a big part of what we do going forward. Small references to Part 7 inspection is also moved within the regulation. I don't think that's too important. It's just a movement of a piece of information within that inspection requirement.
Within Regulation 643.2, this covers the continuity of conductors. This regulation has been altered to incorporate two existing sub-regulations into one. The testing parameters are no longer stipulated. If you look at the old regulation, that's where we described what the voltage was, the tested between, and the short circuit current of 200 milliamps. And the regulation has changed now to show the connection continuity of conductors shall be verified by measurement of resistance on the protective conductors, including bonding conductors and the ring final circuits, live conductors.
643.3.2, it doesn't look too innocuous, but Note 3 being put into the main body has a significant change. Notes are usually normative and therefore you take or leave them. Now it's actually been put in, and the old note used to state the fact insulation resistance values are usually much higher than those of Table 61, and that's it. It now states that when measured values show evident differences between circuits, further investigation to identify these reasons is required. So a little bit more information is required, a little bit more work is required, and that little note change into the main document actually will give a significant amount of emphasis on a particular area.
Within the regulation 612.4.5, this regulation has been removed and is only required during the erection stage of an installation. And there's no bearing on installation after its completion or energisation. So this regulation has been removed and no longer applies.
643.6. The importance of correct polarity within installation has been reinforced in this regulation. Particular importance and emphasis is placed on the requirement to confirm correct polarity throughout the installation prior to any energisation of an installation. However, we do take issue with a certain part of that new regulation that states where single pole switching devices are not permitted in the neutral conductor. We'll probably be submitting a comment on that because we don't feel they should be anyway. They certainly shouldn't be part of that regulation. So you can see as we're talking through these areas that you need to be taking a look at and making comments on, because we'll be making a comment on that one.
In Regulation 643.1.7, this was formerly 612.8.1, which is general. It now has a blanket requirement for both TN and TT systems, and it reinforces the effectiveness of you must confirm RCDs that have to disconnect in the times required by Chapter 41. And it's regardless of the device type, however, Chapter 41 disconnection times have to be confirmed. So it goes through in the regulation how you detail with the requirements, you check against the requirements for disconnection, and you must confirm and verify these that have been carried out and are effective.
643.7.2, formerly 6.1.2.7, earth electrode resistance. The old regulation used to require you to measure electrode resistance. And the no would sort of be a bit wishy-washy. If it wasn't practical to be measured, you could sort of do the value of external earth fault loop impedance may possibly be used. New regulation makes it quite clear and simplifies it, makes it much easier. When measuring the resistance is not possible, the resistance may also be calculated using applicable values, or you can use the earth fault loop impedance method to measure the earth electrode resistance. So all in all, that regulation has now been simplified and made it much easier to comply.
Regulation 643.7.3, this was formerly 612.9. This regulation heavily emphasises the need to ensure circuit continuity prior to the measurement of any earth fault impedance, and also clarifies the values within Chapter 41, which are referenced, and it must require the effectiveness of any supplementary bonding to be satisfied. And as you see, if you're going to carry out any earth fault impedances, an electrical continuity test shall be carried out. So you won't be able to do calculations on this value anymore. It'll be a case of carrying out an R1, R2 test or an R2 test. And within the note, you could spot the change of the appendix 14 to now Appendix 3, which we'll touch on later on when we come through the appendices.
64311, formerly 61214, verification of voltage drop. It was always a kind of a contentious issue, and it was always a calculation or an evaluation of using various circuit impedances to decide whether the verification of voltage drop was acceptable. So now that's all changed. Voltage drop shall be evaluated by measurement or by calculation. So that's very much simpler. Do also note that it's still a note, but verification of voltage drop is not normally required during initial verification.
644, this was formerly Chapter 63. This regulation now replaces the content of 63. The information remains virtually the same, with only a minor removal within Regulation 644.4.202, which is a UK-only regulation, which covers a different type of media types. The reporting on certification documentation can be presented in to the client, and it's making sure it is still important to provide the copies and originals of the certificates to the client.
Chapter 65, periodic inspection and testing. Used to be Chapter 62. It includes all of Chapter 62's content with virtually no changes. There is the numbering system, which was already mentioned, which is to bring it in line with IEC and Senelec. Other than that, there are very few changes. Frank's going to take you through one, but other than that, they're very, very few.
We have Regulation 653. This is a new regulation, and it gives specific requirements to the information that you have to complete when the work is carried out. We should carry out the work, we should receive the documentation that is generated by a periodic inspection and test. And Regulation 653 covers regulation clauses 653.1 to 653.6. And it goes through in detail what should be required and what is requirements to provide information on the appropriate tests that are laid out in Section 643.
We go through appendices now, or some of them. All of the appendices have been updated to incorporate relevant any new documents and new standards, such as Appendix 1 and 2. Appendix 9, 10, 13 and 15 have only really had editorial changes for the 18th edition. So we won't be dealing with any of those for the next part of the webinar. We're just going to be interested in the ones that have had significant changes or changes we feel are going to be useful for us to go through.
As I mentioned earlier, Appendix 3 has received quite a bit of updates, and it gives greater guidance on the disconnection times and the importance of earth fault impedances. And these have been changed around from where it used to be in Appendix 14, and they've been brought over into this Appendix 3. And it lists out the details of your earth fault impedances and the importance of, where possible, you use the manufacturer's specific data regarding any protected devices, because these values could be different from the values given within 7671. Some of them can be higher, some of them can be different values. So it's always a case of looking at the manufacturer's data, and it provides different information than is in 7671.
Frank's already gone through Appendix 3 changes. Most of that is now Appendix 14 that's moved across. One of the more important changes was an outstanding fault with an equation. So ZS used to be equal to 0.8 voltage min, C min, nominal voltage C min over IA. That's now been corrected to be ZS is equal to or less than 0.8 nominal voltage times C min over IA. So again, small actual change, but most of that information has now been taken out of Appendix 14, which we'll talk about later, has now been put into Appendix 3 to enhance that.
Appendix 6 it contains several significant changes, not only due to the Part 6 renumbering, but the consequences of changes to other regulation changes within the 18th edition, which is going to have an effect on Appendix 6. Obviously, the first part here is going to be on the EIC requirement to detail any Part 8 measures, as we discussed in our previous webinar, and also the removal of the exception for RCDs where a risk assessment has been carried out. That has been removed, and as you can see from the changes to the model form, the details of energy efficiency measures, Part 8.1, and details of the measures taken attached to the certificate. This takes out where the previous risk assessment was, and now it's looking for items to deal with Part 8 to be included, if it is considered within the electrical installation.
Although it's already noted on the minor work certificate on the back, the EIC now specifically states that it should be used for the replacement of the distribution board. It is not acceptable to use a minor works, and certainly not acceptable to use an EICR for a distribution or consumer unit change. It can only be an EIC for that kind of work.
Also within Appendix 6, we have significant changes to the minor work certificate. It has been redesigned, and it includes more in-depth information within the model form. As you can see from the first part, Part 1 has removed the risk assessment for RCDs, and it now includes comments on the existing installation, which was in the previous Part 2 of the model form. And it gives more description in Part 1 on what you're dealing with when you carry out minor works certificate and installation work.
Along with all of those changes, Part 2 of the changes where circuit details have moved to Part 3, earth fault loop impedance at dB is required, earthing main protected bonding conductors now required. Part 3 now requires a more in-depth description of the circuit. We're going to be starting asking for dB reference numbers, dB locations, type of dB, all of these things, far more information than you were previously being asked for, and that's to actually bring the minor works back up to speed, because it was very lacking, and now you're going to be asked to put quite a lot of information in there, very close to what we already asked for in an EIC.
Also within the minor works, within Part 4, it gives greater detail to the requirements for carrying out test and inspection. So there's now requirements for R1, R2 or R2 for protective conductor continuity, where previously that was only a tick to say the earthing continuity was satisfactory. There's also requirements now for ring continuity final circuits if the minor works includes changes to the ring final circuit. It's asking for other information in there to be included, and gives more depth and details of the testing of the circuit. You've got also to carry out the inspection and testing of the circuit when you do changes. Now the model minor works certificate requires you to record that information. Then in Part 5, this was a declaration. This is what was previously the information that was required in the previous Part 4 of this. Now, within the minor works form, with the NAPIT members using the NAPIT forms, the majority of this information was already included in our Manual Works forms, and it will be updated to cover any additions that need to be included.
There are many proposed changes to the checklists and schedules, as you'll see as you work through the DPC. One we feel is very important and is going to be quite profound in the industry is components are suitable according to assembly, manufacturer's instructions or literature, which doesn't seem to sound like very much, but what that means is if a particular manufacturer's enclosure, consumer unit or distribution board, if you want to go and fit a contactor, a time clock, an IMD, an SBD from a different manufacturer, even if it's DIN rail mountable, you won't be able to do that. You'll have to find that particular assembly manufacturer's piece of equipment. Again, it's something we feel quite strongly about, and we will be putting a comment in negatively for that particular proposal, because we feel it's quite stifling to the industry.
There's proposed changes to the EICR and also reinforces that they should not be used for the replacement of the consumer unit or distribution board. The only form you could use for that is the EIC, so electrical installation certificate for the replacement of a consumer unit or distribution board.
When carrying out the EICR, we're supposed to be looking for any obvious damage, deficiencies within the installation in general, but we also take particular care of the intake equipment. It may be out of scope and it may not be something that we can repair or do anything with, but we do have an obligation to report to the person ordering the work or our clients that there is some damage, and it needs to be reported to the particular energy supplier. It is not the contractor's requirement or job to go and do that. However, you can advise your client of who to contact and how to go about that and give advice. But it's not a requirement for a contractor to do the work, merely to highlight it where energy supply and intake equipment is damaged.
Also, as we mentioned in the EIC schedule of inspections, the compatibility of components has been included within the EICR inspection schedules. Only appears in the pure inspection schedule and for domestic and similar within the DPC, but we suggest that's an editorial area, and it's going to be included in both the inspection schedule for domestic and similar and the checklist for other types of installations. So again, you're looking at compatibility of components to manufacturer's device and making sure it is all the same type of equipment. Right. So it should be all covered in the detail that cover the compatibility with the different pieces of equipment. Okay.
Generic schedule of test results has been enhanced. If you can call it enhanced, it's just been added to this time round to make it more relevant and more useful. Installation resistance test voltage has to be noted down, so if you're going to reduce your installation test voltage for a particular type of sensitive equipment, you must note down what that lowered voltage is. Residual current device rating in milliamps now needs to be put in. The maximum permitted ZS of an overcurrent device. As NAPIT members, you'll be aware that you should, or those are already requirements from NAPIT forms, etc. The only real new one to you will be installation resistance test voltages.
Appendix 7 has some changes, and it includes the guidance on current capacities of power track systems. So it details all the requirements of the British standard 61534 on 61439-6 of the different ratings from the manufacturer, the different temperature rises, and it explains what the requirements are within them.
As previously mentioned, the old Appendix 14 now sits in Appendix 3. Appendix 14 has now got a new title, Determination of Prospective Fault Current. Obviously, as the name would suggest, it now gives guidance for determining prospective fault current within single and three-phase installations.
Within Appendix 16, there's been changes to the diagrams where more in-depth requirements have been given within other parts of the 18th edition DPC. Certainly parts 443 have changed the requirements for SBDs, so there's been updated diagrams being put into Appendix 16 to cover those changes which have been carried out in other sections. That takes us to the end of the webinar. If you have any questions on the changes to Part 6 or any of the appendices, please submit them and we'll answer the questions you have on that. And we'll be continuing our webinars for future ones where we're going to be covering the actual comments on the 18th edition, which we feel are suitable for issuing to the BSI website, and we'll run through with them in the next webinar. So any questions, please feel free to send them through and we'll answer them as they come through.
Okay, so I've got a few questions. The first one, will we have to use a new minor work certificate?
Yes. The new minor works, bear in mind this is a DPC, so these are proposals, so they might get altered. So the DPC proposed minor works that you see may get changed, might get altered, it might get things taken out of it, it might get things put into it, but there is a strong move towards upgrading the minor works. So yes, as soon as the new BSM 671 2018 goes live, there'll be a 6-month transition period between the old and the Amendment 3 17th edition and the 18th edition, where you can use either. But from January 2019, then from that point forward, you would need to use whatever finishes up as being the new minor work certificate.
Within the NAPIT desktop and the pads that NAPIT provide, the forms will be updated to reflect the changes that come about from the 18th. So as soon as the changes are confirmed, we will create the new forms, and if you have desktop, that will be updated and you'll be able to use the new forms when they come into force. And same with the NCR pads, you'll be able to use the new forms when they come into force.
Okay, another question. Can I calculate R1, R2 from earth loop impedance figures?
No, you can. It's used as a check, but you can't calculate it from there. You have to start the other end, I'm afraid. It is now a requirement for you to measure R1, R2, and calculate your ZS from there. You can't back calculate. That was never actually allowed. It was always a trade-off and a bit of a cheat, but that's now been changed. You can't do an earth fault loop impedance test until you've done an R1, R2 test.
Okay, another one. The minor work certificate looks like it's becoming as complicated almost as an EIC, so why use it? Shouldn't it be made easier to use, not more complicated? It is for minor works after all.
It is a model form, and the minor works has been brought up to speed because the minor works as it was missing some pretty key information. It was designed a long time ago, and we're starting to see minor works coming to us. All of the organisations are seeing them, JCOL 64 are seeing them, where they're being abused, they're being used for things they shouldn't be. So now it's just been brought up. A lot of the information that's required, you should really be noting down or being aware of or inspecting or verifying before you carry out an alteration. So it's not really that much more to ask for.
Okay. Do you think the voltage measured at the time of test should be recorded on the schedule of test results? This will allow verification.
The voltage measured at the time of test will depend on what type of installation you're working on. It depends on what other type of loads were connected at the time. If you were carrying out work, say at weekends, the voltage will be higher than normal because there won't be any load on the buildings, things like that. So it's difficult to record that as a means of carrying out voltage confirmation or volt drop. But you can do it with certain instruments. The standard multimeters, the standard multifunction testers will give you an indication of voltage. But if you're looking for verification of volt drop, you want to be using a more detailed voltage instrument.
Another question, when will the 18th come into effect?
It will be published July 2018, at which point it will run concurrently with Amendment 3, so you can use either document. You can't mix and match between the two. You can either use Amendment 3, 17th edition, or 18th edition for a 6-month period, at which point we go around January 2019, and at that point the live document will be the 18th edition, and that must be used.
Yeah. So from the 1st of January 2019, the 18th edition will be in force, and that's the document you'll be working to.
Okay, so the next one. As an NAPIT member, will new shirts be available to members?
Yes, once the 18th edition comes out, there'll be forms available from the 1st of July 2018 if you want to start using the 18th edition straight away, and you can still use the 17th edition Amendment 3 forms up until the end of December, but the forms will be available from the 1st of July 2018, as well as on
Another question, another question, why have the IET not allowed comments submitted to be read by others? I've made polite comment and it does not show up yet, others do.
The BSI website has a moderator controlling the comments that are submitted to make sure there's no incorrect language or incorrect terminology. And normally the comments will go through a process. By the time you submit them, they go through the moderator, then they should be available. If you do have an issue with the comment not appearing, I would possibly suggest you submit that comment again, in case there was an issue when you tried to submit it. It might be purely a case of an error in the system not accepting your comment. So if it doesn't appear, I would submit your comment again and check it does appear. If you do have any problems with any comments you can't submit, if you submit them to NAPIT, and we can then submit them on your behalf with NAPIT or include them in our comments. And as I said earlier, on the next webinar we do, we're going to be running through the comments which we feel have an effect on the industry, and we will be submitting comments on behalf of NAPIT.
Okay, any word on testing of arc fault detection and how we do a 5-time test on a 300 milliamp and also time delay? With the 5 times test on RCDs, a 5-time test only applies to 30 milliamps or less. If you're talking about a time delay device or 500 milliamp, 300 milliamp, 100 milliamp RCDs, there's no requirement for a 5 times test. It only applies to 30 milliamps or less. With regard to arc fault detection devices, they're very new on the market in the UK, primarily used in the States, using quite a lot for different type of buildings, but as more information develops on arc fault devices, we'll provide information on how you carry out installation testing of those devices. Okay, will the NAPIT PDF fillable certificate be updated? We're looking at providing information through the NAPIT desktop for the certificates. The NAPIT Certful ones may not be updated for the 18th edition. Okay, so what are NAPIT's proposals for addressing the requirements for using the same manufacturer's equipment?
Can you just repeat that question, because I didn't. Can you just repeat that question?
What are NAPIT's proposals for addressing the requirements for using the same manufacturer's equipment?
We have a comment that we intend to field, and that will be in the next webinar. We have that comment bottomed out, why we feel it shouldn't be in the 7671. what we feel are options available, and we will go through that in the next webinar. So we'll give you what the change is, why we feel it's inappropriate or there are problems with it, and lots of the comments that we'll go through, and what we intend to field as NAPIT's comment and stance. But at present, we feel that regulation should not be included in BS 7671. It's not an electrical safety issue.
And with that, when we do the next webinar, you'll see what the proposals are, and any proposals we are looking to put forward, as in the case of this one, is the removal of that regulation from the 18th edition. We'll provide comments on that and suggest that if all the members put similar comments in against that. With any of the comments, NAPIT as a trade association, we will only have one comment against that particular regulation. So with that one, we suggest the members put in similar comments. And like Richard says, on the next webinar on the 8th of August, we'll be going through that, and you'll be able to see what our proposal is for that regulation.
Are we likely to need to do a full exam for the 18th edition, or will it just be a top-up exam?
We don't know yet. We just don't know how the DP is going to go. Sorry, the DPC is going to go. We don't know how City and Guilds and EAL and the various awarding bodies are going to field that one. However, purely from a marketing perspective, it is coined as the 17th edition qualification. It's now going to be the 18th edition qualification. So, should you be asked if you've got an up-to-date 18th edition qualification, etc., etc., if you haven't got one, then it would suggest that you're going to need to do one. So whether that is a top-up or we just do not know that at the minute. We're not sure what's going to happen.
Yes, it could be a CPD update. It could be a one-day exam, or depending on when you did your last exam, it could be a case of a three-day update. We're not 100% sure yet. As soon as we find out what the requirements are, once the finished 18th edition is confirmed, then we'll be able to provide information on the requirements for updating. And if it was only a CPD update, we'll provide that for you, and the same with the training as we did with the 17th.
Okay, do you believe that BS 7671 is way beyond the Electricity at Work Regulations 1989 basic principles, and why have they not been updated in line?
The Electricity at Work Regulations are still the requirement, the legal requirements for electrical safety within this country, and it's still, those regulations are still valid and comply with safety requirements. And 7671, if you carry out the work to 7671, you'll still be seen as compliant with Electricity at Work Regulations.
Okay, why are RCDs being mandated? Their exemption should stay. What's your view?
Sorry, where RCDs are mandated?
Yes, really good.
Sorry, why are RCDs being mandated? The RA exemption should stay. What is your view?
Yes, the sockets and the risk assessment. The reasons for the removal of the risk assessment is the misuse of the risk assessment to not install RCD protection within all types of installations. This only affected installations apart from domestic. Domestic never had the requirement for or the option of a risk assessment for RCD omission. So it's taken us into enhanced safety within normal installations. There are other options to not having RCDs on socket outlets. If it's a particular requirement for equipment, you can install spurs, switch-free spurs, other means of isolation for not installing sockets on a piece of equipment that are normally supplied by socket outlets. So there's ways and means to not have RCD on circuits, but if it's socket outlets, it's a case of there's an increased risk for people using socket outlet equipment, and therefore RCD protection should be provided for it.
How long will members be given to gain an 18th edition qualification?
Again, until we have information on the requirements for an update, it will be a case of waiting to see what the requirements come from the education bodies and certifying bodies on requirements for that. But it's with these things, it would be a case of normally within the date of your next assessment, you would be required to have an 18th edition exam update.
Okay, will NAPIT push for RCBO protection per circuit for the new 18th edition?
Not in particular for RCBOs, though it's one means of providing correct division of circuits and better circuit protection if you've got an individual RCBO. But you still can use the split boards as you did under the 17th edition. There shouldn't be any requirement provided you carry out the correct discrimination between devices and circuits. You can still have a split board, and it shouldn't be a requirement to have individual RCBOs.
No, there might be some special occasions that require them anyway, but that's fine by. But standard installations, I don't see that there's a requirement to do that. It's handy, cuts down on unwanted tripping, but other than that, it's not a requirement, not likely to be pushed for, to be fair.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us this evening. If you've got any more questions that we didn't have time to cover, don't forget you can access the NAPIT Technical Helpline on 0345 543 0330, and there's also the online forum where you can discuss technical issues amongst yourselves at forum.napit.org.uk. We'll make a recording of tonight's webinar available tomorrow morning on our YouTube channel, and we'll leave the webinar running for a few minutes to allow you to download the certificate from the handout section. Previous webinars are also available on the YouTube channel as well. If you can fill out the survey once the webinar closes, we'd really appreciate your feedback, and future webinars will be announced on the online forum, over social media and via email, so keep an eye out for those. Once again, thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye.